Good afternoon. Let's go ahead and get started. This is session 1415, Improv and Art and Music. And I just think we should welcome all people on such a gorgeous day. Isn't this a nice day? All right. So, they are trying a new system for submitting questions this year, which will involve texting. So, here's the script I'm supposed to read you. Audience questions for this panel will be submitted via text. This trial format is motivated by a desire to allow our online audience to participate in the Q&A period and by a desire to improve the overall quality of the Q&A period. To participate in text question submission, you first need to join this session. In fact, if you think you might ask a question in this session, I'd encourage you to take out your phone now. Come on, all you 21st century people. All right. It says, to join this session, send a text message to the 5-digit number 37607 that's shown on either side of the stage. In the body of your text message, you'll type the keyword of this room, UMC 235. You will get a confirmation message that you are now part of this session. Just reply to that message with your question for the panel. So, as always with CWA, we try to allow students to have priority here. So, if you are a student, please note so in your question. If you would like, for anyone, your first name and your location to be read aloud, please include this information in your text message as well. If you do not have a cell phone, if you still live in the 20th century, please get the, it doesn't say that here. Please get the attention of a producer. Where are the producers? Hands? All right. Please get the attention of one of those gentlemen, and they can provide, here's old school for you people, a 3x5 index card and a pencil. It's an old method of writing, actually, for you to write your question. Producers, please wave your arms. You just did that. Finally, when we're all done here, and I'll remind you this at the end, you have to text the word leave, as in leave the room, to close out your session, and I'll remind you of that. We good on the text submission? All right. So it is my first job with regard to this panel, perhaps second job, to introduce our panelists. And I was looking them up last night on the internet. The internet is wonderful for some things. There was an overall theme or set of themes that came out to me. First of all is every one of these people is so vitally involved with their art form. It's their life, and they put an enormous amount of energy into it. Second of all is the usage of their art form for something other than their self-gratification and their career, for activism, for social change, for all kinds of things. And I was totally impressed by that. So let's get to the individual people here. Sitting on my left, your right, Andrea Poli, who describes herself as being creative at the intersection of art, science, and technology. She's currently an associate professor of art and ecology, an interesting mix, at the University of New Mexico. And I thought an interesting example of her work, and I hope I don't steal any of your thunder here, was something called Particle Fall, which was in downtown Pittsburgh a couple of years ago. Is that true? In which she projected a waterfall onto a building, and she had a nephalometer, is that the right word? Something that measures particulate pollution, and as particulates increased, the visual of the waterfall turned into a firestorm. Cool, I like it. Next to her is Joshua Roman, classical cellist and composer, currently living in New York City, yes? For the last several years, since leaving the Seattle Symphony Orchestra in 2008, Josh has been exploring personal and public ways to keep classical music current and alive, including the use of current media forms like YouTube. Correcto? Yes. All right, and he's going to do a master class later. He also had a premiere of his own cello concerto last fall, is that true? In Chicago. And the Chicago Classical Review called it the best premiere of 2015. Yeah. No pressure here, though, Josh. Next to him, Matthew Nelson, dancer, movement educator, and scholar currently residing in Boise, Idaho. And I'm losing visual contact as I go down here. Just stop me if I blow anything. His work combines ecology, that would be the study of living systems, with somatics, the study of embodiment from an experiential first-person perspective. How'd I do? All right. From his Body Sensate website, he says, "For me, choreography is the design of human interaction. Its generative creativity is the function of connecting people in time, space, and effort." All right, moving on down, thank you. To his left, your right, is Renee Marie, who just performed at Dazzle the other night down in Denver, who has lived in Colorado, in Broomfield, for a number of years. She's a singer-songwriter from Washington, D.C. currently. Is that true?
Sort of, kind of.
Sort of, kind of. Okay.
Close enough.
I was interested to notice that she's, and my class will like this, she's a jazz singer who frustrates club owners because she prefers to sing her own originals as opposed to standards, which of course doesn't sell drinks. So that's hard.
It still sells drinks.
It still sells drinks, okay.
It still sells the drink.
In 2008, she made local news around here, and I'm sorry if I'm bringing up skeletons here. Okay. When she was invited to sing the national anthem at the Civic Center in Denver and substituted lyrics and got just all kinds of fan mail for that, didn't you?
I did.
Yes, of various sorts. And last but certainly not least, down at the end, Sam Cooke. Hi, Sam. Poet, National Poetry Slam champion from Minnesota. Have I got that right?
Yep.
All right. Co-founder of Button Poetry, which is dedicated to developing a coherent and effective system of producing, distributing, and promoting performance poetry. There's way too many P's in that sentence for a microphone.
It's true. Plosives
And I watched,
galore.
what's that?
Plosives galore.
Yep. So I watched some of Sam's performances. No pressure here again, Sam. They were intense, people. Okay, so those are our panelists. One by one, they will each, and if it's okay with you guys, we'll just sort of go down the line here, give you about 10 minutes worth of their ideas on improv and art and music, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So, Andrea.
Hey, thank you. I'm going to stand just a little nicer. I'm an artist, but I love computer programming, and I always have since I was a little kid. And when I went to art school, it was the late 80s, early 90s. I went to the Art Institute of Chicago, and it was really uncool to do any computer programming. So I literally was hiding in the basement, computer labs, doing some programming. And I had this really wonderful experience with a mentor. One of the professors there was named George Lewis, and he is a jazz trombone player and a member of the Chicago Art Ensemble, and also an incredible computer programmer. And in fact, he created the first computer-human improvisation system based on jazz call and response. And so I would be hiding in the basement, and George would come in. It could be 2 in the afternoon, it could be 3 in the morning, and he'd show up with a box of donuts and say, "Hey, you know, I think what you're doing is pretty cool. You know, do you know about these cats in MIT and what they were doing with artificial intelligence?" And it was just an amazing experience to talk to somebody who was such a great improviser, also a great programmer and technologist, and really inspiring, kind of bringing those things together. So that's something that I always kind of hold with me. My programming at that time was really involved in chaos theory. Probably a lot of you guys remember that, fractals, and I would do a lot of programming of fractals and chaotic attractors. I was really into the butterfly attractor, the Lorenz attractor that looks like a butterfly. There's a movie about that. And I was interested in how that beautiful image might be translated into sound. So I did a whole bunch of algorithmic composition experiments with turning the butterfly attractor into sound. And I got something that was sort of like music, but not really music in my mind. So I started to work with computer human improvisation systems. So I used the numbers that were generated, the 3 X, Y, and Z that's generated by a three-dimensional image of a chaotic attractor as chunking. So I took chunks of what a live performer would play based on the numbers from the chaotic attractor, and then played that back to the live performer. And it started to feel like something. But then I got away from that work for a while, and about 10 years later, I met a meteorologist on an art science event in LA, and we did a lot of riding on buses because it was LA, and we'd be on a bus for 3 hours. I sat next to a meteorologist, and I told him about the chaotic attractor work, and he said, well, did you know that that is actually a simplified model for air moving through the atmosphere? And I said, well, yes, I do, but tell me more. And he started to talk about how detailed weather models can actually reproduce historical storms in incredible detail today, that the computing power had expanded. So I worked with him, and I created a couple of sonifications of historic storms that happened along the east coast of New York City, and created a 16-channel sound sonification of those storms, and it's on the Whitney Museum of American Art's Artport online site, so you can check that out and you can kind of play each location. And after I worked with him, I got something musical, but not really music, and So I asked my meteorologist collaborator, well, what about climate? Can we do a climate project now? I'm kind of interested in climate. He said, and that's when I learned that the meteorologists and the climatologists were not the same people at all, at least at that time. And so I worked with the climate research group at NASA Goddard Institute and started to do a climate sonification of projected warming in New York City. I was living in the city at the time. And I realized through that project that what I was doing was really modeled off of the sound of the environment and not really modeled off of music. So I started to think about, well, how can I understand the sound of the environment? And I found the World Forum for Acoustic Ecology, which is an organization that's existed for about 40 years now. It's international. It was founded by many people, but one of whom is Murray Schafer, who wrote a fantastic book called Tuning the World. And I started to really get involved in acoustic ecology. I've got with a group of colleagues. We formed the New York Society for Acoustic Ecology. We created one of the first Google Maps hacks. The Google Maps API came out, and I was like obsessed for a month. And we made a project called Sound Seeker, where people could record sounds of the city and upload those to a map of the place where they happened. I started to do a lot of projects with air. Maybe I won't talk about those too much because they're better to see images of those, but I experimented with what does it mean to actually work with air as a medium, and that's where this Particle Falls project came out. And I had, so through that work and through investigating climate and of course understanding what was happening with climate, this was around 2004 that I first got an understanding of how serious climate change is. I didn't know anything about it before that. But through that project and through working with climate scientists, I had an opportunity to go to Antarctica. I went with the National Science Foundation Artists and Writers Program for 7 weeks. And I did a lot of recording of the Antarctic soundscape and also a lot of sonifications of data that the scientists were recording, sensor data, other types of data. And I also did about 30 interviews with scientists. And when I got all that work together and started talking to different labels about putting things out, I talked to a German label called Grün Recorder. And I had been doing a lot of these abstract sonifications, and I was saying, well, I can use the sonifications with the sounds of the soundscape of Antarctica, and it'll be kind of abstract and kind of concrete. And they actually suggested that I use the voices of the scientists. So even though it's a German label, all the scientists are speaking English, we were at a US base, but they they wanted the voices of the scientists, and I think that was essential in that what eventually became the CD Sonic Antarctica. Not only in terms of maybe lyrics or context to what the sound was telling you, but also in terms of giving the scientists a voice to talk about some of the real problems that they were seeing. Some scientists told me, at that time, this was pre-2008, that there was a war on science, and certainly, and that you couldn't say the words climate change in a governmental context. So the art project gave the scientists an opportunity to say what they felt they couldn't say maybe in their scientific context. So that was an interesting trajectory of my work. But now I'm going to sort of back up, though, and I'm going to go back to this idea of acoustic ecology, because when the panel was talking before we started, we kind of thought, well, maybe it would be nice to prep people for listening. And I have the acoustic ecology community has a series of what's called ear cleaning exercises. So I thought that we could do some ear cleaning together. Then I'll play for you a excerpt from a piece from Sonic Antarctica. So once your ears are cleaned, you can kind of fill them with some, stuff. And then that'll lead us into the other panelists who may or may not be creating some sound for you to listen to as well. So the ear cleaning exercise I like to do, it just takes about a minute. And you can leave your eyes open, or you can close your eyes if you want. Sometimes closing your eyes helps with focused listening. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take about 30 seconds to a minute, and we're going to try to hear the sound that is the furthest away from your body that you can hear in this space right now. So we're going to be listening to this space. So let's go ahead and do that, furthest away from your body. So listening for that gives you maybe an idea of the shape and the size of the soundscape that you're in. Now let's really bring that in, and we'll try to hear the sound that's closest to your body that you can hear. This may be actually coming from your body, but let's just take a minute. A lot of times those sounds that are really close to your body are also very quiet and almost on the edge of, are they a sound or are they just some energy that I'm feeling, right? So let's look at that amplitude issue, or let's listen for that. Let's listen for the easier one, the loudest sound that you can hear in this space. So we'll just take a minute. You're probably noting that the pitch of a sound can affect the loudness. The distance from your body also affects the loudness. So now let's try, and I think it's really challenging in this short amount of time that we're doing, but let's just really try to hear the quietest sound that we can hear in this space. So we're really going to try to get our ears as clean as possible. Okay, so I'm going to play just a little excerpt from some data sonification and soundscape from Taylor Glacier in the Dry Valleys. Okay, thank you.
I'll stand up as well. Thank you. That was fascinating, and in some way, maybe we can come back to this or after the panel. I'm curious. I got very obsessed with the planet recordings that I think NASA had something to do with, where they would have the sounds of the planets, and it was some sort of recording they did. The frequencies are far too low for us to hear, but they would raise the frequencies somehow. I just speeding them up, I guess. And so you could hear the rings of Saturn and all these different things, and I would play them in the background. So thank you for the reminder. I'm imagining that many of you, when you heard me introduced as a classical cellist, had an inner eyebrow raise at the fact that I'm on an improv panel. And I wouldn't blame you for that. That's something that I find in our perception of classical music is incongruous. And it's an interesting phenomenon. When you think of classical music, you think of somebody playing Bach and Beethoven and Brahms, and orchestra up there all playing at the same time, chamber musicians reading from the music, or a soloist, as is what I usually do, playing with an orchestra sitting right behind them, something that they've memorized and played probably over and over again the same way since they were 13. And this is more or less true, although I do like to think that there is room even in a piece by Mahler, Gustav Mahler, who is infamous for writing more detail around every note than anybody else in how it should be played, and writing it in very complex German. So it's really fun to do all that translating. But I like to think that even there, the best performances have a power in them that comes from being free to respond in the way that you can in the moment within the rules that the composer has set up. That even though the notes are written, and many times the volume, the dynamics are written, and even the articulation, whether it's short or long, that may be written, but within it there's quite a lot of room to play. Now, I wouldn't call that improv, though. That's still not improv. It's improvisational interpretations of something that's been written down and carried basically the same. And it's an ideal to aspire to having someone hear it as if it's being played and experienced for the first time, not as if it's old hat. So that's, the perception is pretty true now. But the reality of classical music and its relationship with improvisation is very different than in the past than what it is now. Music comes out of improvisation. The first music wasn't written down before it was played. It's not a chicken and an egg thing. Someone did something, and they did more of it, and in the end, if they liked it, then they tried to find a way to remember it. And eventually that became writing things down. But just like telling stories, this is something that evolved along the way. In the Baroque and pre-Baroque eras, often you would have the contour of a melody, but without all the little details. So you might have 3 notes, 3 or 4 notes, and it was just expected that you as a player knew how to add to that, to embellish that, to add trills, to add notes that would connect one to the other, that would make it something more than just 3 boring notes in a row. And the way that you did that signified your uniqueness as a musician, as a classical musician, although they didn't have that term back then. Even some of our most famous composers, Mozart was very famous for his improvisations, his ability to compose on the spot better than everybody else around him. So it's assumed that everyone knew how to do that, at least at a very basic level, if not a skillful level. Johann Sebastian Bach, who is my favorite composer, is considered, and even towards the end of his life was considered this old man, old Father Bach. But at the height of his career, he was most famous for his improvisations on the organ. He was so famous, in fact, and this is a story I told last night and should have looked up to get my details correct before telling it today, but I'm going to do it anyway. So they used to have these organ throwdowns, these competitions where 2 people would meet up and they would compete to see who was a better improviser. And Bach was famous for being able to, in one piece, compose with up to, I think it was 6 or 7 different fugal lines of counterpoint at the same time. It was incredible, something that no one else could do. He would just make these things up on the spot, no preparation. And he did it all the time, and his reputation was so powerful that when he was supposed to meet with the great organist Buxtehude, and he had to walk somewhere around a month or longer to get there, carrying his pack on his back for this competition. He got there, and the night before, Buxtehude had fled town because he was so afraid of Bach by this point. So the thing I like about that story, besides just imagining that happening, is that here is one of the towering figures in classical music, which we associate with doing things the same, with tradition of being the same, and yet that's really not what he was at all. Even by the 19th century, Franz Liszt was incredibly famous for his ability to improvise. He was known as the best pianist in the 1840s to have ever lived, and he was out there just, again, making stuff up, and he would ask people to sing something for him, or he would make up an improv on that, or he would take a melody from a rival pianist, one of the pieces they'd written, and he'd sort of make fun of it in an improv. So it's only in the 20th century, really, that improv started to lose its ubiquitous quality within classical music. And some of this probably was because of the increased specialization across all fields in the world. But I would say that the most devastating thing to that tradition could have been, and probably was, the introduction of recordings, where if you're a violinist, all of a sudden, you're not just the violinist that people can listen to, and that's how they hear the violin. They're comparing you to their recordings of Jascha Heifetz, who is probably still the greatest violinist who have ever lived. So all of a sudden, the bar for playing Brahms, like somebody else played Brahms, goes up, and that uniqueness starts to disappear, which for me is very sad. We got a lot better technically in the 20th century, but we lost a lot of that uniqueness from artist to artist. And that, I think, is one of the major reasons when you hear classical music today, you might think of it as stodgy, old, and you won't expect to see a lot of people at a concert. Because a lot of musicians in their training do not interact with the world around them. They don't interact with the sounds around them. They don't interact with the music of their time. We're trained technically to be incredibly proficient and to think very deeply about what we do, but always in relation to what someone else told us to do instead of what we might do if the floor were opened up. And that is something that I personally believe has to change if classical music is to stay relevant and to continue to be what I've been saying is not just a tradition of certain pieces and composers, but it's a tradition of creativity and innovation. My own personal story and why I'm involved with improv is that I grew up in Oklahoma, and there wasn't the classical music infrastructure that New York City, where I now live, has, or other places. So I didn't really play with other classical musicians. When I was playing the cello with other people, it was a rock band, or it was like somebody with a guitar and somebody with a djembe. I actually learned how to play the guitar. I sang. I did all of these things, and I'll never forget my first improv lesson, which was like the only one I had for a long time. And my dad wanted me to play with him in his church band on a Sunday night. And so I was like, okay, I think it was 9 or 10. I said, okay, that's fine. Where's the music? He said, there is no music. I said, okay, well, what do I do? And he said, well, you know what to do. I was like, well, not really. Well, what if I play a wrong note? I said, well, if you play a wrong note, play it again until it's the right note. I was like, okay, fine. And I don't think it was very good, but that was, that's how I got into improv. I later studied jazz, and I studied enough jazz in middle school and high school to know that if I don't keep it up, then I'm not very good at improving in the jazz style. There's a lot that you need to know. There are a lot of rules in order to have that real freedom to do something that makes sense and is on the spot. There's a lot underneath that for it to be a real quality. That letting go comes after a lot of preparatory work. And while I was at conservatory in Cleveland, I did almost no improv. Most of the improv I do would be me and a couple of friends doing things we weren't supposed to do and getting in the right state of mind, and then going into a dark practice room and just until someone would stop us, just making stuff up. Or in order to throw off the teachers and someone's recital, we would start improving. But it was very much a disruption. It was not the norm at a classical conservatory. After that, I began to have more opportunities in my career, and now it's become something that, like I said, I think we have to do as all musicians, all art forms. Improv is exploration and it's discovery. Some of my favorite improv sessions have happened with people who didn't even play music. Last year, I did something with Bill T. Jones, a dancer, and it was amazing the amount of thought that went into, as we were building our relationship before this performance at a TED conference, the amount of thought that went into creating a language for the two of us and the other musician that joined us, so that the three of us could communicate in real time and really go somewhere without the confusion of, I don't know what that means. So, we set up basically like a video game, a few rules, and if somebody broke those rules, you knew what was happening. It wasn't just a complete free form improv. So I've learned a lot from people like that, and in the end, I feel like improv is something that helps you find your voice. Improv, when you sit down and you start doing it, whatever comes out is probably the closest to your natural voice that you're going to get. Sometimes you have to develop the technical skill to do things that might naturally be there and not come out easily. But once you've got that, that's how you find how you're different from somebody else. Not just by playing Bach and trying to play it differently, but by finding your voice. And that in turn affects the way you listen to music, the way you interact with other people, and even the way you interpret the Dvorak cello concerto when you play it on stage with an orchestra every week. So that's my sort of non-traditional way of getting into improv, and I'm honored to be here amongst these who have amazing experiences with it, and look forward to getting into the nitty-gritty. So here we go.
I'm Matthew Nelson, and I want to invite Joshua to join me in what I'll be doing if he would like. I'm going to take a few minutes first, and then, cool. And if it doesn't feel right, then maybe we do it in part of the Q&A session if that happens. We'll just see what happens. It's an improv. So my way in, I'm a dancer and choreographer, but before I found that, I started drumming. And my dad's a composer, and I grew up playing piano. I grew up in a lot of the world that Joshua talks about. My brother is a composer. And so I started drumming, and I'd just sit with a drum and see what happens. And it was very much for me. And I had never improvised before. I had been, I had played what I was supposed to play, and I felt really like, oh my, wait, I can just. And you can score drumming, but I didn't. I just had my djembe, I had my substances, and I went out and played, right? And then I started dancing a couple of years later. I started playing for dance classes, and I saw these dancers, and it felt like something. And in this, it felt like something too. There was that kind of inner. And what I started to find dancing was my whole body could feel like something. And that changed who I was. And so what I'd like to do is kind of strip away some of the pieces of that. So I'm going to put this mic down for now. Is this one going? Not yet. It'll be going, I think. Stripping down some of the pieces. So notice in your own body what sensations you're experiencing right now. Awareness of sensation and movement is the basis of the field of somatics. Now, as we observe anything, we are having a sensory experience. Notice how you're supported. Where is your body supported in this space? There's a literal place. It's your chair. Where are you supported in your body by that chair? I'm asking how I'm supported in time and space by you and by Joshua. Notice the relationship of your eyes to your head to me. None of us know exactly what's going to happen in the next moment. If we expect it to be precious, does it really have the opportunity to be? So there are resources in any one moment. I draw a lot from permaculture. Permaculture is a design system for living generatively, on the surface sustainably. We have to identify our resources, and then we can take waste streams, the things we might be throwing out, and use them. This microphone could be a waste stream, right? I have to keep using it for you to hear me. Or it's a resource, has direction. Sometimes you can hear me better than other times when you can't hear me as well. My story with dance included a lot of technical training. Tendus, dégagés, ballet, modern. Lately, I've been throwing it all out, been deconstructing my aesthetics. I've been dancing in parking lots for the past couple of years. Been dancing in parks, airports. They cost nothing. Dance is our birthright, right? We don't actually need anything to dance. And I've been trying to let go of it being precious, because then it can just be what it is. If it has to be precious, if it costs $50 a ticket to get in and $100,000 to produce it, then it better blow my socks off. So it's not so you think you can dance, it's you can't effing dance. We can all dance. It is our birthright. And we can get better at it, right? It's worth studying because it is the interaction of the parts of ourselves. I am a community of the parts of myself, my toes, my eyes, my story, my breath, my ear. And we are in community. We are living systems. We are participating in living systems. We are made up of living systems. I have microbes in my gut that tell me I'm hungry for this or that. And I don't even call them me. But they can give me neurotransmitters that tell me what to eat. I am a community of the parts of myself. When I dance, that community connects, communicates, gathers energy, circulates it, creates aliveness. Generating aliveness, I can share it. I have a surplus. I can share the surplus at Trader Joe's in the airport. Here. We can notice the dance of watching, the dance of standing in line, the dance of sitting. And it's all precious. And some moments can be crafted. I love using video and crafting from an improvisation. It doesn't mean every moment is the most amazing thing I've ever seen or that you've ever seen. That isn't the point for me. It's circulating aliveness. It's being generous with myself, with you, with each other. And that comes for me with improvisation.
Renee, don't take it personally. They have places to be at 1
Oh,
o'clock.
no, wait, no, okay, I was just waiting. Is that your class? That's your line. When I point to you, that's what I want you to sing. Okay. Hey, oh, why, oh. Hey, oh, hey, oh, why, oh, why, hey, oh, why, oh. Hey, oh, hey, oh, why, I, oh, why, hey, oh, hey, oh, hi, oh, hey, oh. Can you say that part? Hey, oh. Okay, I'm gonna do that part again. Hey, oh, hey, oh, hi, oh, hey, hey, oh. Can you? Hey, picture that in your mind when you say it. One more time.
Hey, yo, hi, ya.
Very good. I oh I hey oh I oh I. So you have two parts, right? The soft I oh I and what is the other one?
Hey, ya.
Yes, you have to picture yourself doing this when you sing it. Again?
Hey, ya, oh, ya.
Yes. Now your body wants to make a certain sound, right? When you're thinking like this.
Oh.
Or the other one is softer and it's I oh I. Okay, here we go from the top. Hey oh I oh. Hey oh hey oh I I oh I. Hey oh I oh. Hey oh hey oh I I oh I hey oh hey oh hey oh hey ya oh hey oh hey oh hey oh
Ya, oh, ya.
hey oh hey yo hey oh
Ya, oh, ya.
hey oh hey oh hey oh
Ya, oh, ya.
I oh I hey oh I oh I hey oh I oh I. Awesome. So So that's called call and response. But you notice that I improvised around the two things that I taught you to sing, right? First the soft part, and then the more earthy part, where you embody, use your whole body to make the sound. So in listening to my fellow panelists, I realize I am surrounded by genius here. And I'm just so fascinated from everything that everybody has said. So I will just say that, of course, as a jazz singer, that's the phrase that's been applied to me by default. As a jazz singer, the expectation is for singers in the jazz genre to improvise, and there is a lot of improvisation in jazz. There's also lots of improvisation in the blues. There's improvisation in klezmer music, country and western, bluegrass, improvisation in, what's the word? I guess I could use the word ethnically oriented music. As opposed to writing the music down and then learning it, the music is learned from birth. I think you talked about that a little bit, Josh, of how the music is learned from birth and it's improvised on by mothers, fathers, brothers and sisters who learn the song. It continues to morph and morph and morph. And that's because life itself is nothing but improvisation. If you try to eliminate the improvisation out of your life, most likely it won't be in your music either. That's my opinion. I really don't know what else to say. I'm happy to answer questions when the time is, if there's anyone posed to me. But right now, I'll pass it on to my fellow panelists. Thanks, guys.
Could we actually give it up one more time for Renee? That was amazing. The whole rest of the panel so far, this has really been special. So my name is Sam. I am a poet by trade and by passion. And when I first was told I was on this panel, I was a little confused because poetry, at least in the most classical senses, is not something we associate with improv, right? It's like mostly poetry is written by like dead white guys in books, and you've got to memorize it or something, right? And so I was like going to talk about like how much what I do is so different than that, but like listening to the panel so far really has been pretty eye-opening. I hope it has been for some of y'all as well. But one of the biggest things that I heard was this same idea earlier that Josh mentioned, that we create this first and then we codify it, right? Any art form often starts out improvisational or personal or unique and then gets written down. And I realized that that's true for, there is no form that what I do follow. Oh, real quickly, who knows what slam poetry or performance poetry is? Some of y'all? Cool, so there are two really important parts in what I do. One is that I stand up and say very personal things in front of strangers. The other is that it's often part of a codified game, right? There's a system to slam where we have, like, to try to bring the audience back into it, we give an audience scorecards. So like in my normal world, 5 of you out there have a scorecard, and you're going to judge each of us at the end of what we say. And you're going to say, that's a 7, that was okay, oh, that was a 10, you're amazing, like the Olympics or whatever. And so that takes a lot of the improv out of the art form sometimes. We come in very prepared. We know we need to win. We're trying to really prove that we're good at something, right? And in an immediate sense, instead of in the place where we get paid for it, though. So like, we apply numbers in sort of a fun way to the thing. And what I realized, again, in this is that, so slam is this space, it's kind of like an open mic or whatever, where all these different voices come together to create one narrative, where I don't know what you're going to read after I read, and I didn't know you were going to read the piece you read before I read. But our 3 pieces suddenly become this narrative. We're telling a story that none of us created, but the audience is experiencing as if we had. Some people often think there is a curator or a choreographer for the events that I'm part of, but really it's just individuals creating something together. And I realize that that's got to be a kind of improv as well, even if it's happening a level beyond what I'm creating, right? So then I started thinking, what is improv in this space? Why improv? Why do we talk about improv? Why do we like improv? And not just like the comedic art form or whatever, but the whole big thing we're all talking about. And I realized that what I'm hearing over and over again, and I know is true for me, is that improv is a way to put the person you are right now, not your idea of yourself, not your construct or your job, but what's really happening to you in the moment that you're stuck in out into the world, right? Where like usually if I come into a space, I know who I'm gonna be ahead of time, right? I've already figured it out before I ever got there. And I know exactly what I'm gonna say to you, but right now, and when we're talking about improv, really it's, you are reflecting things. You are transforming things in the moment. You're not regurgitating something. And so what's that good for? And the obvious answer for me is health, is self-care, is knowing yourself and allowing things to pass through you and not get stuck in you. So I think we live with our preoccupations, with our triumphs and our tragedies most of our life, and we don't really let anyone else's stuff in. You know, like I'm waiting for my turn to talk about how I'm cool or to tell you about what I need from you, and to instead be reflecting what's happening in this space, like we all hopefully are, is I think both an act of self-care and probably actually in the origin of all the arts that are being done on this stage. Right, all these arts probably start in a space where we're trying to build community. And to know ourselves as a larger group. So one of the things that I used to do before I really got involved in focusing on performance poetry and on slam and on like the business of making poetry relevant to young people was I wrote momentary poetry a lot. Poetry, I would run open mics, and while the open mic was happening, I would write something in response to what was happening on the stage and in the room. So I went ahead and did that while people were speaking, and I would like to share those with you if that's okay. I wrote 2 things in this space. So they're not improvised as I wrote them in the last 10 minutes, but they were created here in this moment. There's 2 of them, and they're very different, and one is coming very much from what I brought into this space, and one's from what happened here. So I'm just going to give those to you guys. Grief is a bridge, and though we must cross it again and again, though we must come to know its stones like family, we must take care not to think we know the way to walk, not to linger here too long. And the second one, and now something exists that did not before, and there is a new herd of tiny thoughts in this room, and one of us here has just sat with a drum and found chaotic attractors in place of substance, or has peeled off a layer from Johann Bach, or has found something blessedly not precious in their own body. And we each search for something quiet in an ever louder room. And we all search for a voice we might share. So I think the biggest thing for me about improv and why improv, and I say that as someone who doesn't think of themselves as an improv person, who's kind of not so much me. I like to plan, I like to control, right? I think that the most important thing that anyone has unearthed on this panel so far is that a lot of what we're talking about are things that are human birthrights that have become codified. They're things that can just be done. We all can sing, and yet most of us say we cannot sing. We can all write poetry, and we can do it in 2 minutes, and yet most of us would say we cannot write poetry, maybe not even understand it. And we can all dance. Absolutely. We can all play instruments and make music, and yet we all say we do not do these things. We can all find the truly amazing connections that we started down at the other end between different parts of the world. We all find music in nature. We all find these things, and yet we are taught not to think that we are the ones who can do these things. And I think a lot of that has to do with, again, to reference down the panel, the idea of recording, of documenting, of capturing, and that a lot of us really think we're never going to be this incredible one-of-a-kind violinist, and so we don't play, right? And maybe that's fine for you or for us, but my concern really, and the thing I'd like to sort of end on, is that I worry that we've gotten very far from the self-care of arts and the self-care of the community of arts and the sameness we find among different peoples and different walks of life when we come together and sing or enjoy poetry or dance or even watch people dance. So anyway, I've had my eyes open to improv in a big way in this. It's an hour and 5 minutes exactly. So thank you to the panel a whole lot. I'd like to stop there, open it up for questions, and yeah, that's my thing. Thank you.
All right, it is indeed time to do some Q&A. If you need to head off to somewhere at 1 o'clock, do so gracefully. I have just a couple of questions been submitted in the standard text mode here, so keep those texts coming. It used to be cards and letters, but we don't do that anymore. Or we have microphones that you are welcome to step up to. I'm going to encourage this. There's 2 rules about the Q&A here. Students get priority, and make it a question, not a speech. Happens too often at CWA panels. So I'll start reading. Please step up to the mics or text me if you like, or text this room or whatever you're doing. This is a question from a student for Matthew. It says, Matthew, have you ever studied Isadora Duncan?
Yes, indeed. Isadora was kind of the beginning of paying attention to gravity, perhaps. The sense that there is a sensation to falling and rebounding that then through lineage Limon took off with it, and now it's the basis of release technique, as it's called. So yeah, I've definitely been exposed to Isadora Duncan's work, and its lineage, her lineage is still coming bright and clear through to postmodernism. I actually personally have started to go a different direction than the idea of doing less, which is sort of what Duncan began. And now I'm really interested also in resilience that comes through activation. So I found some parts of my body from working with release so much starting to get strained, the ligaments getting strained. So now I've been interested in how do we meet that but fill the energy so that it's not a complete letting go into a passivity, but how do we actively find the force of gravity and rebound, which has a springy resilience to it. And I'll probably be talking about that some other times this week, but I won't go there now.
Okay, there's another question from a student of theater. It says, can you, and I'm not sure who you is, so we'll just leave this open, can you expand on how improvising defines individuality?
Well, as I mentioned in my earlier remarks, I think to the extent that we improvise in our own lives, then to that extent we can improvise in our creative pursuits. And if we find ourselves having the same type of week year after year, month after month, surrounding ourselves with the same type of people, eating the same type of food, going the same places in the same way, dressing in the same colors, et cetera, then I just don't see how our creativity can have very much improvisation in it at all. And what that requires, though, to get away from doing the sameness of it is breaking out of constraints that are often put on us by our communities, our families, our communities, and our government. So it's almost a huge risk that we take when we stop doing what people expect us to do and tell ourselves that we don't really care anymore what they think or what they're going to say. I have found that in my own life, by doing that, that is when my creativity and my improvisation just absolutely soars, is when I basically say I don't give a about anything anybody has to say. Sorry.
And this is a round robin here, so anybody who feels like they would like to jump in on this topic, go for it.
Well, I would add a little bit to that in terms of my background, where you do end up playing, like this weekend, I'm playing the Dvorak Cello Concerto for I don't know how many-th time. I've done it many times. And how do I play it differently than other people who play the same thing? I can't expect an orchestra of 60 to 80 people to improvise all together with me and let me be the soloist at the same time in the style of Dvorak. So in my improv, what I've found is certain inclinations. I found that the more I improv, the more I see patterns that arise that I don't hear other people doing. Choices that I make, for me, lately it's been a lot of fifths. It's a very technical term, but it's a certain interval, and I've realized I gravitate towards the fifth and playing with the fifth and the fourth, which is the inverse of the fifth. I love doing that. And so when I look at Dvorak now and I look at his music, I imagine the series of decisions that led him to choose those particular notes. Those notes aren't notes that fell out of the sky onto the paper. He made decisions and he had inclinations towards certain things. And the more I understand my relationship to those, would I have chosen that note? Maybe not. What note would I have chosen? That therefore gives me more of an insight, I think, into why Dvorak chose the note he chose, at least in my perspective. And as I do that, my interpretation of his work becomes more and more my own, but my own based on his instructions, not just what a teacher told me to do and then embellishing on that, but on, going back to, in my case, to the source, to the notes at the very bare minimum of what he wrote, and then the way that that applies to my own musical voice. So that's how I see uniqueness coming out, not just in its unbridled improv form, but also when we do things, when we greet each other. We almost all say hello, I'm sure, but how do you say hello as opposed to somebody else? If you explore different things beside hello and then come back to hello, it may have changed. It may be more your own. So that basic concept, but on a large scale, I think.
Okay, here's an interesting one. It says, please comment, any of us, on how the study practice of improvisation might be inherently limiting to the outcome of the improvisation. Study, practice on one hand, outcome on the
Are
other.
you saying studied or
Studied.
steady? Oh, studied.
Right.
Okay.
I'd love to speak to that one if I may. I did a collaboration when I was teaching at university with a music professor who taught jazz and jazz improvisation particularly. And so we had my choreography and improvisation and dance class and his jazz improvisation class working together, and we'd do these exercises, and we'd come up against this question all the time, like, what are we practicing? And how do we get better at being free with each other? Because we were calling it free improvisation, because there were no intentional scores to it most of the time. Sometimes I'll improvise with a score that's like, well, we're going to work in the spaces around the limbs, or something like that gives what am I going to do? What is the structure I'm going to play with? We could use a spatial one. We could use a temporal one. There are all sorts of structures. But we were looking to have unstructured improvisation. How do you practice that? So we were practicing relationship. And so we would, I would start something in movement, and a musician would finish the phrase. A musician would start a phrase, da, 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 da. Yabba-da-bum. Ba. Yeah, so we'd go back and forth and learn how do we pick up from someone something that's happening and translate it to a completely different medium. That would be a practice, and we'd get better at that, but not be duplicating. We weren't rehearsing a specific set of moves, and we may not even use that exact relationship, but we would be in deeper relationship. And we're not using just our cognitive abilities, like to think about the ego, the what am I doing? We're using all parts of ourselves in improvisation, the sensory, the emotional, the parts of myself that go on going without my even trying. Try not to read this sign. Good luck. So there's so much of what we do that's automatic, and we can train that so we have a vocabulary from which to draw in relationship with each other.
I think I'll speak to this from a programming point of view, actually. Well, there's several different modes in which you can program visualizations or sound, line by line based, or visual programming where you're kind of connecting objects with lines. And I like to do that on the fly. Our computers are fast enough now that if I make a change, I can hear it or see it immediately. And that's really helpful. And in fact, I've seen amazing performances by people who will actually code visually and create sound performances while they're coding. But I think what's great about that is it allows you to end up with a more robust result, because you're trying things out, you're changing the actual coding while you're experiencing what the results are, and you can kind of fix errors or find things that are going to be input that might take things off the rails quickly and easily through an improvisatory coding process. So I recommend that, any of you who are coders in here, to try doing that, because I think it makes for much more robust code. In my case, when I'm programming something that has to respond to an environmental situation, I don't necessarily know what's going to happen in the environment, and with climate change, that's becoming more and more the case. I can sort of test for some really crazy things that I'll think of in the process of this improvisatory coding process.
I have a question.
Please.
What is studied improvisation? What does that mean?
Yes, yes, yes.
I don't know the answer. What is it? What is it?
Maybe they mean like in an academic sense or in a more like codified sense, you know, like a practice
Sure.
of studying improv.
For
perhaps?
example, somebody who studies jazz improv studies forms and scales and that kind of thing. I mean, you can study the materials.
But that's not improvisation. If you're studying what somebody else has done, that's not. Am I right about? I'm just wondering what it is supposed to be.
I guess I think that having the materials is part of what we need to know. Our materials. What are the resources? So, you know, someone who in movement, if you don't know how your femoral joint works and don't know how to use your hips, it's going to be real hard to shift weight. So it's a resource, a vital resource, to have that technical know-how. And tendus and dégagés and all these ballet things may help teach it, or it may get in the way, depending on how it's studied. So I wonder if part of studying improvisation is also knowing what the resources are that you've got. Doesn't mean you have to have the same ones as someone else. What do you think?
But so if you're studying, I'm just going to keep it in the jazz context, although I definitely get what you're saying. But if you're studying improvisation, like say it's Coltrane, so someone transcribes his entire solo, and then the student is instructed to learn that solo, but that's not the context within which Train improvised. So then how is that even improvisation? I'm just asking.
I have
What
a
do you think,
feeling.
Josh?
I have a feeling that it's more. I would have changed the word to practice in that question. To practice improvisation, as I have a feeling it's about. The first thing that I've noticed with improv is that generally, for the first time, when people do it for the first time, it's uncomfortable. And so you have to practice. Not that you practice doing the same thing. You practice letting go of things. And that's, I think, the study of, hopefully that's maybe what they meant, is that the study of improvisation is not studying other people's improvisations, but studying and practicing how to get to a place where you can be free. And to your point of having resources, I think improv is there. We all have resources. You know, we all lift our arm, or most of us, I think, can lift our arms. And we lift our arm, or we can move our eyes. We know those things. But the more that you lay a foundation of rules, or you program something, the more you set up a mechanism whereby you can create expectation. And when you know how to create expectation and how to listen and remember what you've done so far, then you know how to break those expectations and add elements of surprise. If you don't know how to remember where you started, then you don't necessarily know even how you end. And that I've seen that come across in some of the longer improvs I've seen that just went on and on and on. And I wondered, is this related to where you started? If not, it's okay. But I think studying those elements and getting comfortable with being in the present moment as it relates to what just happened, because that is how we experience anything that's in real time. It's the relationship between one moment and the next. And that takes training your memory, really, is the biggest part of it, I think. That's my guess.
So we have an interesting request here. They would like another improv piece from whoever's willing to participate.
How much time do we have?
I was
5
going to say,
minutes.
should we do that
5
at the
minutes.
end?
And we've got 5 minutes till the end?
Yes,
Oh.
5 minutes?
5 minutes.
Okay.
4 now.
T-3.
Go for it.
Go for it.
All right.
I feel like we're on You Asked For It.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, some time, like what? 3 minutes and 20 seconds.
No, I'll need a minute.
A minute. Okay.
But while you're doing things, I'm going to give inspiration.
I'll do something.
Cool. It's my vision. It's my dream.
I'll take this over.
The weight of expectation is undeniable, but can it be put down? And what line really makes us the performers here? And what truth does that line offer? Did some magic bring us to this side of this table and you to that? Or was it a program? That's a little uncomfortable.
All right, excellent. Give it up one more time for our panelists. And I will remind you that if you joined this room to text, you need to leave by texting leave to that same number. Thank you, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day.